Okay, we are in Acts chapter 16. We are in Philippi, and Paul and Silas are there. They're not alone. They have Luke and Timothy. Luke and Timothy are with them as well. And we know that Luke is with them because we are in the we section, and he does include himself in as being there. Now, what occurs, as we did last week, what occurs is an unusual event, and it was a slave girl who is at Philippi. She has a spirit of divination, and she will not stop following Paul and Silas around town, saying the same thing repeatedly. These men are the servants of the Most High God who proclaim to us the way of salvation. Okay, so one could ask the question, what's wrong with this? Now, last week we did discuss it. What's wrong with this? Number one, you don't want what Christ never wanted to be validated by Satan or by any unclean spirit, by any demon. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need their advertising. He doesn't need them at all. But aside from that, as I mentioned last week, I think there's more mischief to this than we may immediately meet the eye, of where she won't stop. She won't stop. She will follow them wherever they go, which means that her masters, whoever they are, can't control her, because most certainly that was stopping their profits as well as what is going to take place, which is Paul's going to become extremely, what is the word that says that he was greatly annoyed, and you would be greatly annoyed. And he casts out the demon, and then she's just a girl again. She's been released. She's just a girl. Now, she would be very happy about that. But her masters are not happy about that. And they drag, that is the word, they drag Paul and Silas to the magistrates. And the first words they say in this is, these men being Jews. Now, what the magistrates don't know, and no doubt what these men dragging them to the magistrates don't know, there is another part to this. And it is Paul and it is Silas, because Silas is also called this later on in the chapter. These men being Jews and Romans. All right, they don't mention that because they don't know that. And neither do the magistrates know that. But I think that's the biggest part of that. If they had not said these men being Jews, what occurred might or might not have occurred. I don't know. But there is something that has been going on, and that is Claudius Caesar has most recently in this time cast out, he's thrown the Jews out of Rome because of what he regarded as troublemaking. Were they? I don't know. I don't know what they were doing. But he throws them out. So it is politically acceptable. It would be acceptable in the day of, you have Jews here. Okay, well, we can just treat them however we want to treat them. All right, it's open season. So they're not going to kill them. What their plan is, they're going to beat them. They're going to throw them in prison. And then they're going to release them and send them on their way. Don't come back. That is the plan of the magistrates, because that's what they're going to do. But the beating is not a minor thing. The beating, unlike the Jews could only beat you how many times with a whip? 40 was the maximum. And following with the Pharisees, they would reduce it to 39, just in case they lost count. Okay. And now with the Romans, they didn't care. They weren't under that, and these are rods. So this, and typically, we might as well we'll get to this. Okay, so last week you have the multitude suddenly rise up together. Why do they care? Why do they care at all? and a miracle has occurred, they won't mention the miracle. They're not going to mention that the girl that had the spirit of divination no longer has that spirit of divination. They're not going to mention that. They're not going to mention that the girl that evidently could not be controlled is just a normal little girl now. They're not going to mention that. But the magistrates tear off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. All right. Now, did this require this kind of response and reaction? Of the high emotions in it, did it really require this? It's that, oh, this is the worst thing ever. This is the worst thing ever. Because here is the charge. These men being Jews, there's charge number one, exceedingly trouble our city. Okay, how were they doing that? How are they exceedingly troubling our city? What are they doing? Is there insurrection going on? Is there revolution going on? Is there subversion going on? What's going on? What are they doing to trouble our city? Are they burning buildings? What are they doing? And they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe. So what they're saying is they're teaching things that we as Romans can't even hear. It's not even lawful for us to hear it, much less do it. Okay? Now that's obviously false. Obviously. Because Cornelius, what was he? He's a Roman. He's a Roman centurion. Okay? And wherever they have been going, there have been non-Jews in those synagogues. There have been non-Jews in the synagogues, and as they continue on, we're going to see non-Jews, referred to as Greeks. There's going to be Greeks in the synagogues. Well, the Greeks aren't Jewish. For Romans, it's not, and that would be Gentiles in Rome, Gentiles under the Roman Empire, that it's not lawful for them to hear it or to observe it. Says who? Who has said that? What law is there? They cite no law. It's just an immediate reaction, and they commanded them to be beaten with rods. Now these rods typically, and we can't know what the rods actually were, but they were made of birch. It was birch wood, and it from the indications in the text, it doesn't appear that any bones were broken, because they're able to walk, and it doesn't say that they had to mend any bones. They may have had a broken rib or something. Maybe they could walk and function with a broken rib, but they are beaten with rods, and this would break the skin and it would bruise. And under the Roman law and Roman practice, it wasn't limited to the back. They'd beat you any way they wanted to. They'd beat you however they wanted to do it. And whatever was available, that's what they would beat. And the best thing to do, if you could, is cover your head and face. That's the best thing you could do and try to defend yourself. But this was a violent thing, and they would have had many stripes here. And which is precisely what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 11:25. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Now this would be the first time he's beaten. It's in Philippi. In Lystra, they stone him in Lystra. But here they beat him. And Silas. Silas is there too. Luke and Timothy were not dragged there. We don't know where they were, but they're not the one targeted. It's Paul and Silas that are the ones targeted, and it's possibly because one reason would be that Timothy and Luke aren't the ones who are mostly speaking, or may not typically speak at all. And that could be the case. And it's obvious that Paul is the one who cast the demon out. So they left Timothy and Luke alone. It could be that they weren't there. I mean, it could be. Now, when they laid, verse 23, so Acts 16, verse 23, and when they had laid many stripes on them, so they're not limited to 40. They're limited to when somebody says, okay, enough. They don't want to kill them. They don't want to do that because it's going too far. But I'm sure if an officer said, kill them, the soldiers would kill them. But that's not what they were to do. They laid many stripes on them and threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. So now we're introduced to the Philippian jailer. He now comes into this. He is the one that evidently is over the prison, and he's to keep them securely. And so how does he do this? Having received such a charge, he does what he's told to do. Having received such a charge, he put them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. So they're not going anywhere. You have the outer prison. We would call that minimum security. The inner prison would be more maximum security, and then they would be in stocks. So they're not going anywhere. Now, we've already seen where, not in this class, but that Peter was in such a position earlier in the book, earlier in Acts, but in Jerusalem. And it was an angel that came and released him, any shackles, any stocks that happened to be on him, and doors open and they leave. And now that's not what's going to happen this time. An angel's not coming to release them. But something else is going to happen. And it is going to take the jailer by surprise. Here we are. But what are they doing? They are praying and singing hymns. Verse 25. But at midnight, so here we are at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. So everyone, at least in the prison, is awake at this point. Now the jailer's not. Jailer wouldn't be in there among them. But the prisoners, at least immediately around them, are awake listening to this. And here is the influence. The influence of Paul and Silas is clear. They're listening to it. And this is what they're doing. So you throw them into prison, they're going to worship God in prison. That's what they're going to do. And you can't stop their influence. The only way to do that is to kill them, and you made them into a martyr. You can't stop their influence. And verse 26, suddenly there was a great earthquake. All right, now here's another one of those details that the author, who is Luke, but if you deny it's Luke, if you deny it's done, this was written in the first century, you have to admit the author of Acts knew a lot of details, and this would be one of them, that Philippi has earthquakes. All right, it's no secret. It's no secret. Now, if I were to fake it, the way I would have to pin it in would be a miraculous earthquake or something like that. If I were going to throw in an earthquake, and I suppose that would have to do. But the fact of the matter is, this is no new thing for Philippi. They have always had earthquakes. Now, this was a great earthquake that occurred, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were loosed. So this is quite an earthquake. Now, nobody dies in the prison as far as anything that we're told. But this is a serious earthquake, and it would seem miraculous, actually, that chains are loosed and the doors are opened And it would appear, if you were asleep and you woke to this, and you go to see the condition of your prison and the doors are wide open or they're off the hinges, the first thing you think of is, I am too late. I am too late. Now, the Philippian jailer was asleep. We haven't gotten there yet. Well, verse 27, and the keeper of the prison, awaking from sleep and seeing the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. All right, so we'll get to this in just a second. But everybody, a great earthquake at midnight, everybody's going to notice that. Everybody is going to wake. Everybody is. Everybody in town is going to wake up from this. And who knows what damage it may have done in other places. If this is what it did to the prison, which would have been built rather sturdy, what would it do to homes and what would it do to others? Everyone would have been roused from sleep in all this. And so what's going to happen is the Philippian jailer is going to he's going to take them home for the night. They're not actually spending the whole night in jail. They're going to be at his house at least for part of the night. But the jailer's not about to take them home without there being adequate guards to keep the prisoners in. Because while Paul and Silas are innocent men, completely innocent men, not everybody in that jail would have been innocent. Not everybody in there would have been a Jew that exceedingly trouble our city and teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe. Or not everybody in there would have been like that. Paul and Silas are. Now, we come to the point here where he is going to kill himself. And it is the charge. It's a serious charge to be the keeper of the prison, to be this jailer under Roman law. Because the Romans, like so many others, get tired of jailbreaks. They get tired of it. And you get suspicious. Are guards involved in this? Is the one over the prison, is he the one that's been bribed and he's the one that did this? And so instead of having to figure all that out, plus you have escaped convicts, they just have a law of if any prisoner escapes under your watch, it's the death penalty for you. That's what's going to happen. Yes, ma'am.
But considering all the damage that was done, I mean, that had to be a miracle or something?
Well, I'm not going to say. The question is, could not the earthquake have been miraculous, and everything concerning the prison with the doors and the chains and all that, could that not be miraculous? Of course. And God was in the mix. But my point is that Philippi did have earthquakes. But being that it happened at that point in time, yes, it's designed. That is a definite design by God. And that, once again, you can't just haul apostles into prison and think that all's going to be okay. You're not going to be able to do that. But with the jail in this condition, and he's just waking up and probably completely disoriented, I'm talking about the jailer, disoriented, trying to figure out what just happened and how long ago did this happen, who all could have escaped out of this prison. Well, he thinks his life is forfeit. That's what he thinks. And he's about to commit suicide. And this is one of those lessons that I bring out when we discuss suicide. Because the jailer thinks he knows his future when he doesn't even know the present. Okay? He thinks his future is death. He thinks it, that it's going to be at the hands of his superiors, at the hands of perhaps of those magistrates, that it's going to be an execution for him. And that just looks like it's got to be. It looks like that's what's going to happen. There is no other alternative to this. He can't escape from this. That it's going just, his life is just being funneled right into this execution. That's what's going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, and here is what needs to be known by everyone, is not only can you not know your future, because you can't predict it. You may not even know what your present condition is. You may have completely misinterpreted that. And with this one, he was just certain that the prisoners had to escape. And it could, losing one is bad enough. How many are gone? Are all of them gone? He doesn't know. And so he's about to kill himself. Now, Paul is the one who cares about him. Silas would have cared for him too. It's Paul who says what he says. But the other prisoners, they're not going to care if the jailer killed himself. I doubt it. I mean, your average thief or your average murderer or your average troublemaker, whatever he is not going to care if a thing about the jailer, about the keeper of the prison. He's not going to care a thing. In verse 28, but Paul called with a loud voice, saying, "Do yourself no harm, for we are all here." So he knows what the jailer's about to do. He knows what the jailer is going to do. And so he calls out to give him assurance, we're all here. Now, what occurs next is astonishing. Number one, that he trusts Paul to get it right. Okay? Because Paul has called this out doesn't mean that Paul knew what he was talking about or that Paul was lying. Because he could easily have lied. Then he called for a light. So there are other men here. Ran in and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Fell down trembling. Now he's thankful for what they did, what Paul just did. But note what's about to happen, because the jailer knows there's something different about these men. What does he know about him? One, and this just goes, and we're going to see this happening again when we get into the next chapter with Thessalonica. That, notice, they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe. So I do think we have clues here that these cities, such as Philippi, that news would be coming in. They would be coming in from not just places like Jerusalem, but yeah, it would be places like Jerusalem. And what occurred in Jerusalem, because that wasn't done under a rock. What occurred in Jerusalem with the death of Jesus of Nazareth, that wasn't done under a rock. Those things would have been known about, and they would have been whispered among the Jews. You also have such as his followers say he resurrected. Well, what's left in the tomb? There's nothing in the tomb. Okay? And that there would be whispers going about among the Jews and then among Christians that fled out of Jerusalem from the stoning of Stephen, going out. They would have known about those things. They also would have heard things concerning individuals such as Saul of Tarsus, who were going out and punishing those who were of the way, followers of Christ. They would have heard things like this. That would have made the rounds in there. And it's not as though news spreads as quickly then as it does today, but it spreads. And now, the jailer knows more than we may give him credit for. Now, we may give him a lot of credit, but he may know more because he trembles before Paul and Silas. He's not trembling before any murderer that happens to be in there or any other lawbreaker that has to be in there. He trembles before them because it would have been known that there was no real crime done. There was no trial because Paul's going to say uncondemned. They've been uncondemned. There's been no trial concerning what happened to them. The idea was beat them, throw them in prison, give them a really bad night there, and we're going to release them tomorrow. That's the plan. But something else occurred. Something very big occurred in all this. And it's going to be one thing after another in this. One is the earthquake. Okay. Two, nobody escaped the prison, and your Philippian jailer now is following the very words they were trying to shut down. All right, that's a big thing. And his family. And what's going to come up is we're Roman citizens. And he means he and Silas both, or Silvanus, he's also known as that. He and Silas both are Roman citizens, and you can't do this. And they are going to be afraid because Paul and Silas now have legally the upper hand. They legally could do a great amount of damage on them for what was inflicted on them. They could have. Now we're getting ahead of ourselves. But so the Philippian jailer comes to Paul and Silas, and he's trembling. And he brought them out and said, now why does he say this? He knows something. He has been prepared some way. And I don't know how, except that he's heard things. Sirs, what must I do to be saved? That's a very strange thing to ask randomly. He doesn't ask anybody else that. He doesn't ask the magistrates that, his superiors that, any of the prisoners that. He asks them. And I think he thought the earthquake was because of them. Now, so do I. Matter of fact, I'll know it. I know it was. But even though Philippi does have earthquakes, this one is timed perfectly and chains are loosed. So anybody in the prison could have left. All right, what must I do to be saved? Verse 31, so they said, this is not just Paul, this is Paul and Silas. Now, remember, we found out earlier that Silas is a prophet. Silas is more than, I say more, he's a Christian and he's a preacher, but he's also a prophet and he's also a Roman citizen. But they said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved, you and your household. So it's not just limited to you. You and your household. Verse 32, then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in the house. So you have a group of people now in this. And once again, they spoke. So it's Paul and Silas saying these things. The word of the Lord to him. Now notice, and we've been talking about this, especially in our Romans class, of people who want to take something out of the text and just make that stand alone. You can't do that. You cannot do that. You can't do it to any verse. It just, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right? Which God? All right. How long did it take him to do it? And did he walk away? What happened then? You don't know. You have to read more. You have to read, you have to continue on down there for it to be defined for you. But notice, believe on the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household. But what does it mean to believe on Him? It would be to be obedient to Him, because that's not the last thing they said and that's not the last thing done. They spoke the word of the Lord to him. So that included more than you have to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. It had to be more than just those words, because they are teaching them more. Verse 33, and he took them the same hour of the night and washed their stripes. So he now takes care of them. He's showing them compassion that was never supposed to be shown at all. All right, you don't take a prisoner and take care of them. That's especially one that is like this. You give them food and water, I suppose, or unless it was where the family or friends are supposed to supply that, which was a thing, and it could be here. I can't know, but he washed their stripes. Okay, because they would have been, well, looked a mess and bruised, and you would have had dried blood on them and their clothes, and infection would have set in. But here's the next part. And immediately he and all his family were baptized. Who told him about baptism? Well, that goes right into they spoke the word of the Lord to him. It's exactly like Acts chapter 8, where the Ethiopian eunuch all of a sudden is saying, look, here's water, what hinders me from being baptized? Baptism hasn't even been mentioned in the text. It just says then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning at this scripture, which is Isaiah 53, 7 and 8, preached Jesus to him. Okay? Which had to have included the plan of salvation leading to baptism. It had to have, for him to even be able to say the word and know what he's supposed to be doing and know that there is salvation. Well, the same thing is happening with the Philippian jailer and his family. And immediately he and all his family were baptized. They all believed. They all were baptized. And everything changed that night. It was about to be a terrible tragedy where the Philippian jailer dies by his own hand. And that would have been a terrible night for everybody, including him. And it wouldn't have stopped for him. But here we have a completely different outcome. Once again, he did not know his future. He didn't know his future would be this. And here we are the same night. And nor did he know his present. He didn't know what it truly contained. He didn't know. Verse 34, now when he had brought them into his house, so they're not in prison anymore. He brought them into his house. He set food before them, and he rejoiced, having believed in God with all his household. So they rejoiced because of this. Now, this rejoicing, it says, having believed in God with all his household. That's why they're rejoicing. It's not the family necessarily rejoicing that his life was spared from his own hand, but that their situation has now changed, and they truly believe it. Right? This isn't just this sounds like what we ought to do, and that they've not been familiarized with any of this. They've never thought that they needed salvation, that this is completely new and foreign idea to them, that of saving their soul. He had to have known this. This had to have been in his conscience. This had to have already been with him, saying, what must I do to be saved? Something had to have already been around for him to ask that kind of a question. Now he's doing something that the magistrates never wanted him to do. They're out of the prison. They're in his home. They're special guests. And he's feeding them. Okay, now comes morning. And this is where the news reaches the magistrates, because the magistrates, and when it was day, the magistrates sent the officers saying, let those men go. So their officers sent from the magistrates and just let them go. That should be enough for them. They should have learned their lesson, and if they cause any more trouble, they know what's going to happen to them. So the keeper of the prison reported these words to Paul, saying, the magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace. Okay. You can leave the prison. It's good news. But Paul's going to have a different reaction. And he's not going to let this slide without them knowing what they did. Because that news is that'll remain in Philippi. That will remain in Philippi. Not only know what they did, but they're going to have to acknowledge it. They're going to have to acknowledge it to Paul and Silas. They've got to. But Paul said to them, they have beaten us openly, uncondemned Romans. That's plural. Uncondemned Romans. That means Silas is a Roman citizen. And have thrown us into prison. So, uncondemned Romans, there was no trial. Name the crime. The magistrates couldn't even name the crime. There is no... What law did they break? There wasn't one. There wasn't one. Now, was there a freedom of religion in the Roman Empire? Obviously there was. All right? Because you have synagogues in these various cities, and if there wasn't a religious freedom, then Jerusalem could not have the temple there. Temple would have been gone unto the Roman Empire years ago. All right, there is religious freedom there. There is a toleration of religion. Now, while you can have Claudius Caesar, who gets tired of the Jews in Rome, and I don't know what they were doing, if they were doing anything. But maybe it was just politically expedient. Maybe it would please some. But I don't know what it was. But he runs them out of Rome. Okay, and that's actually what occurred with Priscilla and Aquila. They actually had been in Rome. They are Jews. They had been in Rome, and they had been cast out. That's why Paul meets them in Corinth, because they were cast out of Rome, and they had to go somewhere. So they went to Corinth. But all right, so we are uncondemned Romans, and you've thrown us into prison, and now do they put us out secretly? No, indeed. Let them come themselves and get us out. They've got to acknowledge what they did. And they're going to do that. They know they just committed a crime. And they're going to try to appease Paul and Silas as best they can. All right? They weren't about to go to the prison to release them. That's why you send officers. You delegate. I got better things to do than to go see those guys off and give them a final warning. I don't need to do that. Just send somebody else. Now, and the officers, verse 38, and the officers told the words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. Yeah, they would be, because the punishment would be severe on them. You can't do this. Not to Romans. You cannot. And yes.
They had no charges against them.
Right. That's right. And there was no trial. I mean, it's just really unmerited accusation, because the accusation doesn't even make any sense. It's extremely loose kind of accusation. They don't explain Okay, how are they troubling? What are they teaching? What is so wicked that even the words cannot be heard by Romans? Because there's a lot of wicked things spoken in the Roman Empire, and a lot of different, even if we're talking about religions, there'd be an awful lot of religions. That not only do you have the basic worship of Jupiter and his lot, but you also have, they've got Egypt. You're going to tell the Egyptians they can't worship their gods? Well, they do. You're going to tell the Jews in Palestine they can't worship their God? Because they do. And there would be all kinds of little cults and little things that were in the Roman Empire. All right? Which one of these are considered dangerous to where just saying them in front of Romans is going to get you beaten and thrown into prison? Just saying them. None of them. I don't think. There'd be none of them that would do it. That you had the right to your own religion, and I'm sure there would have been certain things that, now granted, there are times when the Romans go against the Jews. Yes, they do. As a people, they most certainly do. And when you get into the Roman-Jewish wars, going into the 60s and into 70, that was war going off in Palestine. All right, that didn't mean they were eradicating Jews all over the empire. It just concerned the trouble there. And but they are now afraid of what this could mean for them. So they're going to do it. Verse 39, then they came and pleaded with them and brought them out and asked them to depart from the city. They plead and ask. And I think this has more to do with saving them than anything to do with keeping Philippi safe from them. Okay.
Was Paul concerned about the church there?
Oh, yes, because what's going to happen, yes, the question is he concerned with the new church, the new Christians that are there? Yeah, we come to verse 40. So they went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia. So they go back to where they were staying. And when they had seen the brethren, they encouraged them and departed. How long did this take? Could this have been through the day and later in the day they left? Yes. Could this have been a couple of days? Sure, it could have been a couple of days. Could it have been a time of we need to recover from the beating and go? Yes, we're not told how long this was. This could have been the same day. It could be that they're let out first thing in the morning, and then they go to Lydia's, and then they see the brethren and encourage them and depart that day. That's very possible. Or they ask them to depart. They didn't say, you've got 10 minutes to leave town. You know, they didn't, as they're pointing toward their watch, by the way. And that, you got to be out of town today. They plead and they ask them, knowing they could make no demands on them whatsoever. They knew it. And yes, Paul and Silas do care about those new Christians, and they encourage them. And so we have, and no doubt this was a good time to have a physician with you. This would have been a very good time after receiving that kind of a beating. All right, now we're at a good stopping place. We go into chapter 17. In 17, Paul's going to be going into Thessalonica, then into Berea, then into Athens. And in Athens, we get another one of his sermons, another one of the things that he says printed out for us, recorded for us. We don't always get that. Just like with the Philippian jailer, it just summed it up, what he and Silas were saying. But appreciate everyone being with us, and hopefully, prayerfully, we can continue next week.